And do introduce your guest.
Okay, I am a retired educator. I graduated from Drexel University in 1960, a long time ago. And right now I'm enjoying retirement, but in the process, I wrote On Donsy's Trunk, the book that I thought I had in me all the time, all my life. I got around to it. And that's what we're here to talk about. Okay.
Yes, can you introduce your guest for us? For the folks out
Well,
there, in case they don't
I
know.
am so excited because I have cousins with me. Lourdes Webster is one cousin. That her grandfather and my grandmother were half sisters and brothers. They had the same father. And so we share great grandfather. And in my book, I call him that man, for lack of any other word, okay? And Donna and Deborah are twins that were children of my cousin, Dolores. Dolores was my grandmother's first grandchild. So she's the older cousin. And she adopted Donna and Deborah, brought them home from the hospital, and they were with her till her last breath. And so I'm excited because I haven't seen them in a couple of years. We usually have family reunions and I get to see them. And because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to do that. And Lourdes used to live across the lot or across the road, whatever we can say, across the grass, okay? From
ditch.
My grandparents. Across the ditch, okay?
Yeah, across the ditch.
Yeah, and I am so excited to see her because I hadn't seen her. Lourdes, has it been 40 years or more?
Oh man, it's been like forever. It's been a long time.
So I'm really excited to have them join me to help tell this story of Aunt Donsy's Trunk.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Lourdes, do tell us about yourself. Twins, tell us as well, but we'll go first with Lourdes. Tell us about yourself and what would you want us to know?
I'm retired now. I retired early from the Department of Navy. I was a civil servant worker, and I'm now widowed and retired. I have one adopted son and 3 granddaughters, and I'm enjoying retirement.
Yes, and Deborah and
Donna.
Deborah and Donna. Would you
I'm
tell
gonna
us
let my sister
about
Donna go
yourself?
first.
Go ahead.
My name is Donna Purcell. As Elaine said, we're cousins. I believe she was first cousins to my mother. And this is my twin sister, Deborah. We're 60 years old. And we also spent a great deal of time and of our lives growing up at Aunt Donsy's.
I'm Deborah. I'm a early intervention service coordinator. I work with children with special needs. And my sister, she works with she's a private duty nurse's aide.
Oh, wow.
And thank you for having us.
You are so welcome. Well, let's get started with Elaine. Tell us about Aunt Donsy's Trunk and where is it now?
Well, I'll let the twins tell you where it is now.
Okay.
But I'll tell you about the trunk. It's something that was always a curiosity to me because Aunt Donsy kept so much secret about it. And if she wanted to go into the trunk, she would close the door. It was in her room. She'd close the door and lock it sometimes. She had the key to the trunk she kept in her apron pocket and actually put it under her pillow when she went to bed at night. She didn't mean for anybody to get into that trunk. Aunt Donsy was a caretaker. She took care of everybody. And all of us have spent time with her at times in our life, lengthy times with her. She was a polio victim. She got polio when she was 9 years old. And she always walked with a crutch. She started out walking with 2 crutches. And then as she got older, she was able to wear a brace and walk with the crutch. And as she got really older, She walked with a walker. So she never was one that could run and play and jump around. She always was confined to having to walk very slowly and carefully in the house, but she took care of everybody. And she used that crutch for everything. She used that crutch to make up the bed, making sure that everything was absolutely straight on the bed and putting the pillows in place. She used that crutch to chase us. If we were doing something we weren't supposed to do, she'd stamp that crutch on the floor, and we knew we better get out of the way. She hollered, scat, scat, scat. Okay. I never saw Aunt Donsy with a frown on her face. She always was so pleasant. I never saw her use a bad word. I never saw her scream or holler at anybody, but she kept it straight. She keep everybody in line. And I don't think she ever went to a public school at all, but she taught everybody. Everybody that came through that house, she took the time to teach you. And everybody, I couldn't spell worth 2 cents. She had me stand up in front of people spelling, okay? So this trunk was a curiosity to me. It's the biggest thing that Aunt Donsy had for herself, and she kept it to herself. Before
the twins tell us about it, I know in the book, the backdrop is your family history. Does it stems as early as the 1800s? Could you give us the backdrop of the book in that era? Does it stem as far your family history as early as the 1800s?
Well, my grandmother, Aunt Letty Ann Elizabeth Gwen Searcy was her name. And she was born in, I can't remember the date now, 1800s, so, but she was born a few years after the Emancipation Proclamation. I think maybe 8 or 10 years after that, she was born. And her father was a freedman. He was listed as a mulatto. And he was actually born in Coswell County in North Carolina. And his father was a white man, we found, who was brought there. He came from further down south. He was the only one of his family to move closer north. North Carolina was closer north for him. And when he moved to Leakesville, which is not that far, Rockingham County is like next door to Coswell County. When he moved to Leakesville, he got his son to come to stay with him. And he was a colored commissioner for a county commissioner for the coloreds. That's how it was listed. And but as well known as he was in the community, he was an absolute leader in the community. He was the inspiration for a one-room schoolhouse for coloreds. It was named after him, the Gwen Schoolhouse. They just tore it down a couple of years ago. And but I have pictures of it in the book. And but as well known as he was and a community leader, he could not stop his own daughter from being raped. And that's where my grandmother came from.
Okay.
Okay.
And when you talked about that, you mentioned the rape, and we'll come back to that as well. When you mention that, because there's a lot of rich history that you have, and we don't want to go too fast on this story, because I did look at your videos and I thought it was very important. I don't know, I think when I spoke with you before, I don't know my family history or anything like that. And as rich as this history that you had, that's why I was so interested in it. I want to, we want to tell them what's in that trunk, but we want them to kind of wait to know what was in that trunk, because it's very rich, the things that I've read about. And those, if you haven't read the book, Aunt Donsy's Trunk, do read it. And Lois, I want to ask you, and twins as well, if you don't mind me saying twins, because I get that name, y'all names mixed up. But Lois, what was it like, what of Aunt Donsy's Trunk? What was that like? in that time, or what you know about her? What specific memories do you have?
Well, Aunt Donsy took care of me as an infant all the way to about 3 or 4 years old. So that meant I was at her house every day. I remember the trunk. She always had the trunk sitting at the end of her bed. She had a very high bed. And at that time, I was a little kid. I couldn't climb up on the bed. It was too high for me. So my earliest memory is sitting on the trunk, and she was putting my shoes on. But after that, I didn't really pay any attention to the trunk. As I grew up, I was more interested in playing with my cousins and, generally getting under Aunt Donsy's nerves, So I remember that crutch, and I remember how she used to bang on the floor because I was kind of mischievous.
Goodness. And twins, if you don't mind, one of you go first. What is your fondest memories, or what do you know about Aunt Donsy and that trunk?
Well, what my fondest memories of Aunt Donsy, first of all, are I will always remember she was a godly woman, always a lady. She was very, very loving and kind. She loved to cook, and we spent summers with her, and during the wintertime too, and Deborah and I spent a lot of time with her. But I think one of my favorite memories of her is going to church with her and sitting on, I don't know if it was the third row, but I remember she would sit on the end of the row and put her crutch up under the pew at St. John Methodist, and Deborah and I would sit with her. And those are the memories that I will always have. And about the trunk, I remember, as Lourdes has said, that it was always at the bottom of the bed. We were always told, don't bother the trunk, don't go in the trunk. It was always a curiosity to us, because to me, because it was always there. It was always, as I remember, in the same place. And you had to have respect for the trunk. Whatever it had in it, at the time we were children, we didn't know what was in it. So that's what I remember about the trunk.
Well, we did know one thing that was in it. She kept her pocketbook in the trunk.
Oh, her change purse.
Her change purse was always in that trunk, because anytime she wanted something, she'd have to go in the trunk and get it out, get it out of the trunk, or anything that she thought was precious to her or that was important to her.
Yes.
She kept it in the trunk.
And maybe we shouldn't tell where the trunk is. Well, wait a minute. No, I guess we can. It's at Donna and Deborah's house. Do you remember when it came to your house?
It came when Aunt Donsy passed away.
But
yes.
It came, like your mother gave it to my mom, but it was in Reevesville first at Uncle Robert's brother's house.
No, wait a minute. Let me tell you, I was there when your mother came and got it. Dolores walked in the house. This is after Aunt Donsy died. And Dolores walked in the house with two strong men. I don't forget who they were now. And she walked in and told Uncle Robert that Aunt Donsy told her to take the trunk. He couldn't dispute that. Aunt Donsy's dead. So she came in with those strong men, because it's a big, heavy trunk. It's a steam trunk, and it's very heavy. And she took it out of the house, walked fast, and I was looking at her do it. And I thought, oh my goodness, good for you, okay? Because I wouldn't have thought of it. She took that trunk. And where is it now? In your house.
In our living room.
In your living room?
Yes,
to
we're
this
looking
day?
right at
Like
it.
right now, to this day?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
You're looking at it now?
Mhm.
You all can't, but we can.
So let me, so since you, Elaine, you're the matriarch now.
Yeah, I've got 20 years on from the youngest one to me, and Lourdes is sort of in the middle. So
Yes,
I'm
I'm
the
11
matriarch
years.
of the whole family.
I'm 11 years older than the twins, and Elaine is 13 years older than me.
Oh, wow. With seeing
So
that
we have
trunk,
different memories.
Yes.
and that's what I wanted to get those fresh memories from you guys. With you, Elaine, seeing that trunk, and all, this question goes to all of you, seeing that trunk. And I think if I remember correctly, I read the book some years ago, is like she got it from a consignment store or something like that when she first got the trunk. Where did she get the purchase it from? If
And
I remember correctly.
my father gave it to her. When they
Mhm.
were moving, my parents were part of the exodus from the south to the north. So they were moving north, and my father had the trunk and he didn't know what to do with it. And Aunt Donsy asked if she could have it. It was something he was never going to carry. He didn't want it in the first place. My father had been a what do you call it, waiter, cleaning the busboy
Mhm.
at a resort in Massachusetts. And one day, one year they went just before the 1929, what do you call it, 1929 crash, the stock crash,
Depression.
depression. And the year before that, he had been the year he worked in Massachusetts at the resort. And he and another friend of his from Reedsville, North Carolina, were loved to dress. So they had bought all these fancy clothes. And that was in 1929. So the zoot suits and heavy sweaters and all sorts of things. And they had no way to get them home, but they were planning to go to college before the crash. So they had all these clothes and they had no way to get them home. They went looking for something to ship, because they had to ship it on the train. And they found at this used furniture store, they found this trunk. And I've always wondered what happened to the trunk before. Where was it? Where did it come from? Because it was already an old trunk. And so they bought it for 50 cents, a quarter a piece, and put all their clothes in there and put it on the train and sent it to North Carolina. When it got to North Carolina, they flipped coins because neither one of them wanted this trunk. To them, it was a monstrosity. They flipped coins, and my father said he lost because he got the trunk. And then he had to figure out how to get it to his house, which was not that far from the train station. He got it home, but then Aunt Donsy, when they moved, wanted to the trunk. And my father and my grandfather came over and got the trunk and took it to her, and it was hers. It was like it was the most prized possession for her.
Mhm.
Wow. Any of you, Lotus, Deborah, or Donna, when you got the trunk, or you said you sat on it, you was misbehaving, but with
I remember the trunk. I was at Aunt Donsy's house every day. Every day I went over there until I was graduated from high school. So I remember the trunk, but I didn't pay that much attention to the trunk. I was more interested in the organ, and she had this cuckoo
Yes.
clock that had
Yes.
more appeal to me than the trunk.
Yes, than the trunk.
The organ she had was a pipe organ. It stood up. It stood up from the floor to the ceiling. I've never seen anything like it. And guess where they got it from? Sears and Roebuck catalog. And taught themselves how to play it. It was a pump organ.
yeah, I
Feet
remember
had to
like
go
in
like
Winston.
this.
Yeah.
You had
Yes.
to pump air into it.
Yes. They got it from Sears and Roebuck catalog and taught themselves. My mother learned enough to pay for the church. But they taught themselves how to play. I don't know how they did that. Okay. Yeah.
But what happened to the clock? The cuckoo clock?
Well, Lourdes, all of the things that we of all the things that were in that house, and there were plenty of things, Alan. There was a big bowl with a big picture inside from back in the 1800s. And all of these things that were in that house, we lost it, everything.
Oh, wow.
It's that trunk is the only thing we have, the only thing we have as a family. And
Wow.
it is, my mother told me that if we do anything ever in your life, she said as a warning, don't let somebody come into the family and take what the family has worked hard for.
Mhm.
And that's what happened. You have to read the book. I'm not going to tell you everything.
Yeah, don't
read the
give
book
it all
to
away.
find out.
Don't give it all away. I
Mhm.
know with Donna and Deborah, the book opens up with Clarence's funeral. And this is your father. And
Correct.
I understand, the book has, grown since then or more things in it. But tell us about your father and what you can remember about Clarence. I fell in love with him just reading that little glimpse of how his wife was. So.
Oh, he was wonderful. He was a wonderful father. He would, back then, when we were growing up, you didn't have a whole lot of toys. So he'd play a little game with us. He'd have Donna on one arm and me on the other, and he would just take us up and down, up and down. And we thought that was the best thing in the world.
We did.
And I was spoiled to him. He could not leave out the house without me. I was his little shadow. He would have to sneak out.
Oh,
I remember. Oh, do you want to talk about Do Power now?
you can still tell us. Yes, do tell us what
Okay.
you remember.
I remember him going to Duke Power, and he would always leave an hour early for work. He was never late for work. He was even having heart attacks going to work, and he didn't realize he was having a heart attack. But when he retired from Duke Power, you couldn't get him to go down there at all. But as we talked as a family, we talked to Elaine, I come to realize that they had to go through that court case. And I think it brought up a lot of memories of that. And he just didn't want to deal with it anymore. But Daddy was a very soft-spoken person. He was quiet unless you got on a subject that he liked, and he could talk your head off. But mainly he would sit and observe his surroundings.
Another word for saying being nosy.
But according to the book, that's when you guys really realized or paid attention to the trunk. We're still not going to tell them what's in it yet, but reading from the reader, from me as a reader aspect, it didn't seem to be very important until after your dad's passing. And then it seems like it just zoomed everybody in to that trunk. What do you guys say?
It just
Well, it's at the funeral that we actually, as a family, began to pay attention, because I remember asking what anybody remembered about the trunk. We're all sitting around at the repast, and everybody started talking about what
She's muted.
So we were actually there at different times. We all had the same memories about that trunk. So that's when it really we realized that we all had similar experiences, and I wrote it down. I started writing down what everybody said. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Lourdes?
Yes.
You all said yes. So there's quite a few people I want you to tell me about, Elaine. And let's start off by just telling me about the Searcy family.
Okay. It's interesting that the Searcy family went to what's called Hayes Chapel Church, right? Donna and Deborah know more about that church than I do, because I only remember going there for funerals. We have a lot of family buried at that church. And after I wrote the book, this has all come about because I wrote the book, and somebody read it that was a historian and did genealogy and asked me about some of the people in the book and everything, and began to look up things for me because I wasn't a genealogist. We found out, and I don't know how many people in the family actually knew this, that my grandfather, William Searcy was his name, his father is buried at Page Chapel Church in what they call the lower cemetery. There's two levels of the cemetery. And he's been there so long, because my grandfather, we didn't find out about it until like years later after he passed. And the people that are in that church are, so many of them are members of the family. Dolores met Clarence there. Clarence told the story to me. I asked him, how did he come to know Dolores? And he said, well, he went to church that morning and everybody stayed at church all day. They took lunch and stayed over to the second, you know. So he said he had a chance to sit down and talk. He had an eye on her, thought she was mighty pretty. And so he sat down and talked to her during the at the lunch, at the dinner between the services. And he said by the time that he had, the next service was beginning, he had himself a girlfriend. And so Dolores used to laugh at that story. He'd tell it anytime. I see you shaking your head, right, Donna, Deborah?
Uh-huh.
I remember when they were courting before they got married.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Yes, because they came over Aunt Donsy's house and they were sitting on the couch, and I was a little kid, you know, being nosy. And Aunt Donsy was sitting close by.
I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that, Lourdes. I knew Faye got married
Yes.
there, but I didn't know
I
they did.
remember.
They get
yeah,
married
I
on Donsy's?
What?
Did they get married on Donsy's?
I don't know where they got married. I remember when before they got married, they were still courting each other. They weren't married yet.
Okay.
I don't think they were married. They could have been married. I was little. I just remember them being at the house, sitting on the couch together, you know, acting all giggly, all in love, you know.
Oh, okay.
So they could have been married. I don't remember. I was young. I was very young. I was very young.
They were precious, I tell you.
Yes.
And I was just kidding about the remark about my father being nosy, because he was soft-spoken and quiet, and until you got on a subject that he liked, like Deborah said. But he was also easy on the eyes, I must say so, even though he was my daddy. Very good-looking man.
Very handsome man. Tall. And
I described him as the salt and pepper hair that had no intention of going bald. He was a full head of hair.
That's right. That's right.
Built like
But
a man.
Dolores was beautiful too.
Yeah.
Dolores was
Wow.
beautiful too.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Tell us about I'm gonna just call off some names. I'll call them off slowly so you can tell us about. I've seen some. I'm not saying that others' names that we don't talk about aren't important, but these just stuck out when I looked at you guys' video and I did some reading on you guys. You have Sarah Frances Gwynn Carter and Lettice and Cersei. Could you tell us about them
Letty.
too?
Well, Letty Ann Cersei is our grandmother. Okay. Letty it's Lettie, Letty. And you
Letty.
ask her what her name was, she'd give you the whole name. She said Letty Ann Elizabeth Gwynn Cersei. She'd tell you everything. You said, well, Grandma, where'd you get all those names from? Well, Gwen was her maiden name. Letty Ann Elizabeth were the names before her maiden name. And then she got married. So it's Cersei, she add that on to it. So Letty Ann Elizabeth Gwen Cersei was our grandmother. And I found I had to get my mother's birth certificate after she passed. And I think this is something nobody knew. They had on my mother's birth certificate, they had my grandmother Letty Ann listed as a white woman. And nope, I think that nobody knew that. I think that she didn't even know it because she hated the white in her. And if anything made her mad, that would be it. So we didn't find out a lot about her actual heritage before she died because she wouldn't allow it to be talked.
Now,
She wouldn't allow anybody to talk about it.
remember earlier we talked about the rape. Is she part of that rape, or is something different?
She's the result of that rape.
She's a result of that rape. So let's talk about that, where you said in that rape, if you don't mind talking about it, that this man, had raped the women, your grandmother being part of it. Like you said, she hated that white and what it did to us. Could you explain to us in your own words what you thought she meant when she hated that white? Was it because of the rape, or would just tell us what was it that you think in your own opinion?
It's because of the rape, of course. She was, she wouldn't talk about it. She had no interest in explaining anything, and people were asking questions about why she's so much different color than everybody else in the family, and she wouldn't really talk about it and really wouldn't allow anybody else to talk about it. I remember having a conversation with Aunt Donsy. We were in the kitchen at a table, and I had asked Aunt Donsy a question, and she was going to answer it. And Grandma walked through the kitchen, overheard what we were talking about, and told Aunt Donsy, be quiet, shut it down, that's it. She wouldn't allow the conversation. I did get one piece of information from her, and the only time that I think she talked to anybody about it, she told me that when she was a little girl, about 3 or 4 years old, she was on the road, that dirt road, okay, and walking with her mother down this dirt road by their house, and her mother was holding her hand, and all of a sudden her mother started shaking. I write about this in the book. Her mother started shaking and quivering, and she said like she was afraid, like she'd seen a snake or something. And then all of a sudden she just stood still, and she's standing there shaking. And she said she saw this white man on a big white horse with a white suit on, riding down. And when she came close to her, her mother was standing still holding her hand. He didn't say anything. He got off the horse, went over to her, picked her up. She's a little 3 or 4 years old, picked her up, held her up in the sky, and set her back down, got back on his horse and rode off again. Never said a word to her. And her mother was standing there quivering. And when he rode away, she said, her mother told her, Letty, that's your father. And that was the only time I ever got her to talk about it at all. But Lourdes knows a few things because she's done some research more than I have. In all actuality, you want to share anything, Lourdes?
Yes, if you'd like to share anything, Lourdes, of what you know.
Well, first of all, the lady that I call grandmother was actually my great aunt. So when Elaine talks about Grandma Letty, I called her grandmother also, but I didn't know she was my great aunt. I thought she was my grandmother until she died. Grandma Letty and my biological grandfather were half brother and sister. They had the same white father. But I didn't call my biological grandfather, I never called him granddaddy. I called Elaine's granddaddy. Because we lived, it's kind of confusing. I lived next door to them. I practically was raised in the house. I knew I was related to them, but I thought that was my grandmother and my grandfather. Getting back to, I don't want to talk too much ahead of time, Elaine. I don't want to go too far ahead.
Well, the fact is that my grandmother and your grandfather were really close. They were brother,
Yes.
half brother and sister, but
Yes,
they were
they
really
were.
close. They were only a couple of years in age difference, and they visited each other. After church, we would go to his house, and I remember him with a lot of kids around. He was always enjoying the children. He made tire ring swings for us. And I just remember real comfort at that house to play, with little children to play with. And they were in, when they passed within a few years of each other. They were close all their lives. Mhm.
And Elaine and I talked about this recently, because the person that we both thought was that man was not the one that was that man. You want to explain that, Elaine?
You explain it, because you know more. Yeah, we found,
Okay. In
doing the
chapter-
research here. She's done more than I have.
Okay, in chapter 22, she talks about biological grandfather inherited the house and 700 acres of land from that man. But actually, it wasn't that man, it was that man's brother that that man in question was a doctor. My biological grandmother was a midwife who worked for the doctor. So she got pregnant, and that's how she got pregnant. The doctor was that man. So she got pregnant from that man and had my grandfather. Am I leaving anything out, Elaine?
I think not. The fact is, the brother that man was actually married. He was a doctor and married. 5 children. Okay, but his brother was not married.
Right.
And his brother took the credit for those children that were all over town.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking when you said that man was not that man, I kind of got it when you were saying that. And I realized when
so
you
the
said that
DNA,
man.
the DNA would be the brother.
Yeah.
Found out where they buried and everything.
Did the truth
brother
ever come
is the
out?
one. My grandfather was raised in the house of the brother.
Mhm.
And the sense, if you look at the census records, it has him working as a servant. But he was more than a servant. He was part of that family, because when he died, the brother willed all of his land and the house, both houses, to my grandfather. Okay, so but in the book, Elaine says that it was because the brother had some kind of deal with my grandfather to look after the 2 sisters, but there really weren't 2 sisters. It was his mother and his sister, because the brother it was just the brother and the sister and the mother living in the house.
Mhm.
And I got my information from ear hustling.
Right.
Okay.
But
I
being
was
back in
ear
that,
hustling.
being back in that time, it had to be a little hush hush, because couldn't you all someone could have gotten murdered because of the mixing of the blood and because of him being married and different things like that?
I don't think so, because it seemed to be that was what was going on. Okay.
Right.
I'm
And
just thinking in the sense of his brother taking the
could
credit.
Black women could not say no. They were
Right.
that, and it still continues in a lot of places. It's all around us. You can tell we're all different colors.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right.
So yeah, Black women could not say no, and they had to put up with it. And this is the result. But we are close. We love each other, and the foundation doesn't make that much difference. We are where we are.
This is beautiful. There's some more names too. You have William and you guys say Cersei.
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 Mhm.
So you had Williams, and you have Otis and his wife Eleanor and James Johnson. Could you tell us about those?
Okay. William Cersei is our grandfather. He was married to Letty. So he's the one I was talking about. We found out where his father is buried, right there on Hayes Chapel Church. And I really wanted, I'm putting it out there. Anybody that's listening to this, they can give us some information about Hayes Chapel Church. I've tried to find out because there is a big rock, a boulder on that land. And someone told me that had been a member of that church all her life and actually goes back and knew all my family and everything. She told me that it was called a slave rock.
Mm.
That church, I remember when it was just a wood building, then they made it into a cinder block building, and now it's a brick building. But they never moved that rock. That rock is a big boulder. And I can imagine if it's been called a slave rock, people were, because she said people were sold on that land.
Mm.
What I don't know, I can't seem to find out. So anybody out there that knows how to help me, I want to know, how did they get, the Black people get that land? Hayes, the Hayes Chapel. Hayes is a family name that's all over that area, including in our family. Dolores's maiden name, my mother was Hayes. My mother's sister, who her mother is her mother's sister, was married to a Hayes, Doc Hayes. There's a whole Hayes family. So how did the Hayes people, Black people, come to own that land if it was called, if it was slaves were sold on that land? So
Mm.
anybody out there that can help us out, I'd like to
Wow.
know that story. Mhm.
And then you have
But-
Otis. Tell us about Otis and James.
Okay, Otis is my mother's brother. They were 2 years apart. My mother was the youngest. And so Uncle Otis was her big brother. Uncle Otis was tall and fine, okay? He was, I guess he did construction work. And he had a job in Philadelphia. And he took care of housing for people, you know, caretaker for housing. And he would get jobs doing construction work whenever he could. But in those days, Black people couldn't belong to a union or anything, but they got hired because they could do the work. So in building the Philadelphia Hospital, University of Penn in Philadelphia, when they built that building, he was hired to work on construction on that building. And he never was afraid of heights. So they sent him up on a high roof to work. And he fell 5 stories, broke almost every bone in his body. He never truly recovered from that. And because he was not a union member, he had absolutely no income, nothing, and everything. He lost everything because of it. And I remember how everything hurt him for a couple of years, and he passed because of the injuries he got from that. But every time I pass by that University of Penn Hospital, I think about it. Yeah, but, and Eleanor was his wife. So she stuck right with him. She was really, he was so hurt. He was so broke up. He never was right after that.
Mm. You have another one, Aunt Donsy's nephew. Is it Cosmo?
Cosmo was Dolores's brother.
Mm-hmm.
Dolores was the oldest in the family, and Cosmo was the next one. And Dolores and Cosmo were very close to each other. Cosmo had a family. Was it Don and Deborah, 4 or 5 children? Do you remember?
It was 4. It was 4. 3 boys and a girl.
Okay. I had a picture. I don't know what happened to it at one time because tuberculosis was big.
Mm-hmm.
And Cosmo's wife and 2 of his children were confined to a sanatorium. That's what they did with people with tuberculosis in those days. They put them in a sanatorium, and they were in there for about a year to get rid of it. Now, vaccinations came along, vaccines, and you don't hear anybody with tuberculosis anymore.
No.
Okay, but they had vaccination when they got there. Okay, that's what stopped it. But that before then, people ended up in sanatoriums, they called them, sanatoriums. So Cosmo was, he was an ambitious person. I thought he was the smartest man I knew. And I was much younger than him. I may have been about 6 years old when he was a teenager. And he used to go milk the cows. And I would go with him. I'd be hopping along beside him. I thought he was so smart because you know what he did? He took the milk from the cow and he's walking along and he says, watch this, Elaine, watch this. And he'd take the bucket and swing it all around and none of the milk fell out. That was amazing to me. None of the milk fell out. Centrifugal control, right? I thought he was so smart and smart and wise. Okay, he was a magic man for me. None of the milk fell out.
He was an interesting character in your story.
Yeah.
To me, he reminded me of a New Yorkster, jive talking type guy. He was very smooth in there, and he was a very interesting character in the book. I remember him being in there. Very interesting character.
Hard worker, and his sons and all they were all hard workers. Everybody in the family, the men were really strong, tall, and hard workers.
They have a story going on now that we all talk about. You guys, you were 2 years older, the Emmett Till story. What did it do for you guys growing up? And we're talking about it now. What was that like, living in that era at that time?
Well, for me, I was always going down from Philadelphia to North Carolina every summer, and I would spend the whole summer. And I would even, because school started down there 2 weeks after school started in Philadelphia, I would stay and go to school with them and come back just in time for school to start here. When Emmett Till was killed, I was in my first year, I think, of college, of high school, Overbrook High School here in Philadelphia. I think I was the first year. And that was the last year that I went down for the whole summer. It got to the point that I would only be able to go while my parents were there, which would be their vacation time, which would be a week or two at the most. And I didn't know why. And I didn't mind because I didn't want to stay down there all the time anyway, okay? I thought it was nothing to do. I said, except swat flies, okay? And so I was okay with staying home and staying in Philadelphia. We had parties, we had clubs, and we had all sorts of things to do, activities up here, and it was pretty much laid back and quiet down there. So, but my father didn't tell me, and the parents never said anything until we were sitting around at the, talking at the funeral. And he told me then that the reason they stopped bringing me down for the whole summer and stayed down here with me was because of the Emmett Till murder. They were afraid that anything would happen to me. And I could see that it could have, because I was a big mouth. I wouldn't take no for nothing. If we went into a store and I wanted to try on a hat, I was going to try the hat on. And Dolores and Faye and my cousins, they would say, Elaine, please, we got to stay here. And I didn't know what was the problem. So they kept me out on the farm, okay? Keep me away from everything. Because I would have caused the problem. I'm sure I would have. So
yeah,
that's what happened.
Any Deborah, Donna, Lourdes, anything
Well,
during that time you remember?
I was only 4 years old when he died, so I don't really remember anything about Emmett Till.
And they wouldn't remember anything.
Reverend Donna wasn't even born.
So what was it like? What was it like for you guys growing up in that maybe more so Elaine in that Jim Crow era? What was it like
Well,
growing up, shopping, transportation, school? What was it like then?
Lourdes, you were
Yeah,
living
I grew up
more than
under
I
that segregation.
was.
Yeah, I remember we had to sit in the back of the bus. I remember going to kindergarten at 4 years old. One of my next door neighbors was my kindergarten teacher, and she would pick me up. We would catch the bus, and we would always have to sit in the back of the bus, the colored section, to get to the kindergarten. And the kindergarten was a private kindergarten because Black people didn't have kindergarten back then. The schools were segregated. So our kindergarten was in a house on Henry Street. Henry Street was one of the Black communities, the area where mostly a lot of Black people lived. Did it affect me as a child? Not really, because I was a kid. I didn't really want to be around the white people. I really didn't. And then I remember we had the drinking fountain in downtown. It had colored side and the white side. And I would always drink out the white fountain. I didn't care. I just drink out of any side I could. I never got caught because the pipe was the same pipe. It was the same pipe with the water coming up. It just had two separate spigots on each side. So I was little, I had to step up on this block to reach the knob to get the water to come up. So I remember that. And I went to a segregated school from the 1st grade all the way up to the 9th grade, Douglas High School. It was called Douglas High School, even though we had a 1st grade. And I must say that was some of the best memories of my life growing up in that segregated school, because we had some of the best teachers. They were great teachers. A lot of the teachers had advanced degrees. They couldn't get hired at some of the colleges, so they came and taught at the high school. And all of the teachers just loved on us. They cared about us as Black kids. I learned Black pride. I learned to be proud of being a Black person. And then when I got into junior high school, that was doing the James Brown, "Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud," So then I sort of became, you remember I told you I was mischievous as a little kid, right? So when I got about 13 or 14, I was like all into Black pride. And I read a lot of history, Black history. I had to supplement some of the history because the books that we got were handovers from the white school, the history books. So my history teachers would give us a list of authors to read, like John Hope Franklin, and then there was Lerone Bennett was another one, and Booker T. Washington, Up from Slavery. So we had a lot of books to read that supplemented the textbooks in the school. And then we had a bookmobile, because in the Black section on Henry Street, there was a Black library, because we couldn't go to the white library. So they had a Black library on Henry Street. And in the summertime, the bookmobile would come through Price Road and park at Springfield Baptist Church, and we would go over to get books to read. This was because of all the teachers, all the educators. They wanted to make sure that the Black students, that we were well educated, and they were great. I loved it, but I didn't like being forced to go to the white school when we had to do integration. So
now, Lourdes, me looking at you, this is off script, okay? Because you're mentioning it now. So how did our people of color, did they see you as being Black enough and they thought that you passed? Because I'm looking at you and I can see that your skin is different from mine and that you probably could have passed. Did you have any of that during any time in school?
I never
of us.
Never ever had that problem. Because in
Never.
my family, we're all different colors. I mean, we go from the darkest dark to the lightest light. So, and I never had that problem.
Wow.
Although when I went to the Black school, there was colorism. There
Uh-huh.
was people that talk about, well, you light skinned at this and you light skinned at that. I personally never let that affect me. And I don't recall anybody bullying me because I was lighter complected or anything like that. And I certainly didn't bully anybody that was darker than me, because my mother's mother was a dark-skinned woman. She was my grandmother. She was dark-skinned, but her husband, my grandfather, he could pass for white. And my mother was light. So I got it on both sides, but it was never a problem for me personally. But I do remember growing up at that time, they would make, some of the kids would make fun of you if you had nappy hair and if you had braids in your hair. And I remember that, yes.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Lourdes, tell her about your experience when you went home with a schoolmate took you home and the mother was upset. Remember?
Oh, you mean when the white kid?
Right.
Oh, that was
when you
when
ended up going to a mixed school. Mhm.
yeah, when I went into the 10th grade, we were forced to go to this, it was a white school. That's the school that Deborah and Donna graduated from, Moorhead High School. And I had a few, I won't call them friends, I'll call them acquaintances. They were white kids in school. We got along pretty good because I was on the drama guild. We did acting and stuff. And I remember one day after school, we were going somewhere. I can't remember. And I was in the car with them. I was the only Black person. And we dropped off one of the other girls to her house, and her mother was outside. And when she saw me sitting in the car with all these other white kids, oh man, she went off on her daughter because her daughter was in the car with that, nigger. So yeah, I remember that. But the daughter didn't have the problem. It was the mother that had the problem.
Wow.
And that's always the case.
Right.
That's taught down, and the
Right.
children don't have the problem.
That
The
is so
parents are the
true.
ones.
So we're seeing in a few, if you still want to, Dolores, if you have your book with you, you're going to read for us. But while you're doing that, getting it together, you said page 4 through 6. I want to ask all of you, in this, what we see right now, 2022, happening from 2021 on up, what do you guys see different as far as colorism, as far as racism in this 2020 year that we see now, especially from where you guys came from in the 60s, the 50s and stuff like that? What do you see? And of course, Elaine, it may be what, the 30s for you, y'all, the 50s and 60s or something like that?
Don't
The
put me
years
back
you
too
were born
far.
in. Oh, we won't go back too far.
Well, I think I'll start first.
Okay.
I graduated high school in 1969, but in 1965 was when Title VII of the Civil Rights Act was passed. And then in that, companies had to make affirmative action. In other words, they had to start hiring, put Blacks in jobs that they couldn't get before. So I grew up, when I went to college and graduated, I grew up at the time where companies were hiring more Black people into companies because of affirmative action. I remember the progress that was made in the early 70s and maybe into the late 70s, but then something happened. All of a sudden, our people wanted to be, this is the way I felt. I felt that our people wanted to be white, because once the Civil Rights Bill was passed, there was no more cohesion. Because when I grew up, the Black community, we went to church together, families helped each other out. I mean, it was a sense of community. But something happened along the way with integration, where then some of the Black people just wanted to be white. They went to the white schools, and we just lost something. And then with drugs and everything else came in, and we just went all downhill. So I miss the times when I grew up, even though it was segregation, even though the school was segregated, I miss that Black community. I miss the closeness, the churches. I mean, it didn't matter if you were Baptist or Methodist, we went to everybody's church.
That's right.
You know, we just went to everybody's church. And I grew up going to the church across the street, which was a Baptist church. Then I started going to Aunt Donsy's church, the Methodist church. Then later on, I started going to the Holiness Church. I went to all of the churches, and it was just wonderful. And I remember Black families would take in other kids, because one of my cousins, my mother took her in, and she lived with us for a while, and she lived with them with my great aunt. So that was just that sense of family. I miss that. Something happened. So I guess Deborah and Donna would have to pick up after me, because they graduated after me, and their views would be a whole lot different about Black people. So
For us, when we went to school, it was desegregated. So we were always with white people. I mean, when I was in the first grade, I was the only little Black girl in the class. And that was basically like that all the way up, because there was so many white individuals that lived in Rockingham County. And I think that was the main reason why I went to a Black HBCU.
yes.
I went to historically Black university, Wisconsin State University, because I liked that fellowship of, you know, being with people like me.
Yes.
Because, you know, when we was growing up, we had the church, you know, for us, and we went to church, so we was always at church.
Right.
Church, that was our family. You know, we didn't do a whole lot of outside. You know, we took our yearly vacations, and things like that. And I've always wondered why we always ate, like Elaine would say, we would always eat at the church, and we did. We always had our lunches at the church so we could get ready to go to the second service, because we grew up in a holiness church. So for me, I mean, it doesn't really bother me, but the only thing that ever really bothered me growing up was when we were walking home from school one day and this white boy spit out the window at us. And also being called a nigger when you were in school. And I'm usually the quiet one. I normally didn't say anything, but I almost got expelled because he called me a nigger, because I am not a nigger. I am not a sorry low down person. Did you ever look that word up in the dictionary? So, you know, things like that would bother me. But other than that, it was fine with me. What would you say?
Well, what I remember is when we moved here in this neighborhood, we moved on the end, on the road that's mainly white people. Even now, the majority is. And I can remember there being some woods between our house and the house next door. But they tell me that the gentleman that lived next door, which was a white man, went around in the community talking about there was a Black family going to move in, the property values were going to go down, and everything that was going to happen when we moved in. So when we moved in, because these young people had heard their parents talk this talk, they bombed our mailbox. They made the mistake of bombing our mailbox 3 or 4 times. My father did call the police. My father would sit outside in the car with a shotgun at night because he was tired of his mailbox being blown up. And so when the police finally did come, my father just told him, said, I sit in my car with my shotgun. And the police told him that you can't do that, Mr. Purcell. He said, well, I'm defending my own, I can't keep having my mailbox blowed up.
Or my house egg.
Oh, the house egg, that's right. And so we went through that when we first moved here. And so I agree with Lourdes that the Black, we're family. We're all family, and we need to get that connection of family back together. Now, my favorite street in all of Eden, all of Greensboro, of Stoneville, Madison, whatever, is Henry Street. I absolutely love Henry Street. I just drive down Henry Street just to reminisce. I had a school teacher that lived on Henry Street, and of course the Miss Kitty's restaurant was on Henry Street, and the funeral home, and then Miss Alberta Finley. Do you remember Miss Alberta?
Yes.
Lourdes?
Yes.
Okay. And then I think some of the now I don't remember, of course, the kindergarten you went to, but I think I remember, did they have a Masons?
Yes.
the thing?
Before you guys were born, Henry Street was jumping. They had a movie, there was a colored, they call it colored, a colored movie theater.
Oh,
That was next door to, I think, the Elks Club, the Elks, the Masons, or did the movie theater turn into the Masonic? I can't remember. But then there was the funeral home. There were beauty shops. There were barber shops. There were dry. There was a laundromat. There was a library. There was on top of the library. There was or next door to the library. There was a little, sort of like a restaurant, not a real fancy place, but you could go in there, play pool, and buy some food or something. It was just a nice community. And then on the other end, there was a YMCA, because we couldn't go to the white YMCA. But next door to the YMCA was this house that sat back, a little house. That's where I went to kindergarten, on Henry Street.
okay.
And right across from that house is where your church is now, the church you go to.
Yes, Monument.
That's right.
Oh,
But it wasn't a church. It used to be a house there at that time. It was houses all up and down that street.
oh, okay.
Actually, there were two funeral homes. There was the man, his last name was Cole. They moved in around 1957. They moved somewhere north.
Okay.
But yeah, Henry Street, and then the YMCA was more directly in front of your church. What's there now? I guess they tore that little building down, right?
Right. Miss Josephine Richardson used to live in the house that was right beside of, I don't know, the Robertson Memorial, little Robertson Memorial, and then Miss Josephine Richardson's house. Right. And they are both gone now.
Right. Oh man. Well, across the street, there was a building that was a YMCA, then there was a playground next to it. It only had a swing set, and then there was a hedge. And we would, on the other side of the hedge was a house that I went to kindergarten at, and we would come through the hedge, cut through the hedge. There was a pathway to go to the swings during the day. But Henry Street was where everything happened on Henry Street, unless you were in Reedsville.
Still love it.
Now, if you lived in Reedsville, everybody knew where Scale Street was. I guess you know about that, right, Elaine?
In Reedsville, you had the block. What was called the block.
On
That's
Scale
right.
Street.
And I write about the block in my book. I tell all about the experiences on the block. It was no telephones. Nobody had telephones. And we come into town and we want people to know we were there. We just go on the block. And it was like a telephone. Everybody on the block, by the time we got where we were going, they knew we were in town. Okay. Yeah.
That's
okay,
right,
I'm going to, the block. I think they just tore it down recently because it was everything there, like you say, the movies, the ice cream parlor, the
barbershop,
beauty parlor, beauty shop, everything was there. And that was right across the street, almost directly from the train station.
Right.
So people would get off the train, head for the block, let everybody know I'm in town.
Wow.
Okay, you all have mentioned some things along the way. You're talking about Clarence and how strong he was and how defiant he was defending his home. I want the section I'm going to read about is about Clarence, my memories of him. And I just see his strength, and to know that we did not know how important he was and what he was going through. And I see in some of the things that I said, I must have had an inkling, but I didn't really know. I didn't know the details. And there's a museum in Reidsville, I think it is, the Mark Museum, which stands for the Museum and Archives of Rockingham County, MARC. And that the people who are working at that museum, there's a Vanessa, I can't even say her name, Valencia Abbott,
Yeah.
that has found and uncovered some really important information. We found out that Clarence was part of a 13 groups of them that had a court case with the Supreme Court of the United States. That is so important because we are still living under the ruling. It was completely in our favor. But he was part of this with the NAACP group, the plaintiffs that brought this suit. And the result of that suit is that Black people, talking about, Lourdes was talking about the time period, 1971 was when that verdict came down. So before then, they had been struggling. Black people didn't have many jobs that they could do, but they were qualified to do things, they couldn't be hired. So he was part of this group that called it Griggs with the NAACP versus Duke Power Company. And the Duke Power had a tricky way of, they would hire Black people just to do maintenance, just to do hard labor, and not pay them anywhere near what anybody else in the company got. And they had restrictions about how to, it was awful. These men got together in that time period, in Jim Crow days, and bought this suit and won it. And as a result of that suit, they got, all of us are able to walk in any place and demand the same pay anybody else gets and can do the same job right now because of that. So it's a very important thing that happened. But the people in the family, we knew we was going through something, but we didn't know what, because they didn't talk about it. The silent generation, they didn't talk about it. He didn't come home and talk. Donna, Deborah, you knew something, but the extent of it was, you didn't have no idea what he was going through.
And we knew he had to go back to school to get his high school diploma, because they were saying they wouldn't give him a raise or pay them any more money because they didn't have a high school diploma.
And
so
he
went back to school.
Yeah.
And I think
So the section I'm going to read, what'd you say, Lourdes?
Well, I was going to say that when you said that they didn't want to talk about it, because my father didn't talk about things either. And he didn't talk about, because he was a Marine, and he was one of the first Black Marines. They call them Montfort Point Marines. And when he got out of the Marine, that was in 1940, in the 40s, 40, let's see, what was it? Around 46 when he got out. But he didn't benefit from anything, the VA, all that VA bill and all that stuff. He didn't benefit from anything like that. But he waited, it was until 2002 that he received the Congressional Medal of Honor, the gold medal, for being one of the first Blacks to enter to be in the Marine Corps. But he didn't talk about how he was discriminated against. I didn't find out about that until later. So maybe Clarence just didn't want to talk about it. Maybe he didn't want his children to know about it. I don't know, because my father never told me anything about it.
Right.
I think it's a generation. It actually is called the silent generation.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, because we could be in the same household and not know and understand what they were going through. They didn't want the youngsters to think that we the same thing would happen to them. They were handling their business.
Right.
Yeah, because he couldn't even come back with his uniform on. He couldn't even come back home and be seen in the South with his Marine Corps uniform on. He had to take it off.
Oh, really?
He and his brother
They
were
were
both.
lynching,
He
they
and his
were
brother
lynching
both.
Black men who had
Yeah.
military unit, and he served during World War II. He was stationed in Okinawa. He didn't get any benefit at all from being in the Marines.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah,
Wow.
but I didn't know any of this till later.
Did you keep his Congressional Medal of Honor?
I think my brother had it.
Okay, okay.
It was just a certificate. I got a picture of it.
Oh, that's
He
nice.
wasn't
That is
the only
wonderful.
one. All of the ones that were the first group of Marines, everybody, they got the award after they died, many years after they died.
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
Before I read this, I do want to say something. I wrote a book called Price Road, which is the name of the road that my grandmother and Lourdes lived on. And Price Road, the picture on the cover of the book is actual Price Road. And it's taken from in front of Lourdes's house, where the church is. That picture on the front of it, it goes right in front of the church, which was right across the road from Lourdes's house. I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you.
That's neat.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to read. This is about Clarence and my view of what was happening. And like I said, it was afterwards that we found out. I didn't know all he was going through. But we feel so honored to have had him in our family because to us, he's a hero for sure. Okay. Dolores, who is his wife, and her surviving siblings, Lottie, Faye, and Wilbert, settled in the living room with my father, while I and everyone else seemed to be in constant movement throughout the other parts of the house, hovering around, sometimes sitting for a spell on the edge of the sofa, sometimes joining in the conversation, sometimes giving Dolores a hug and seeing that she got something to eat. In the corner of the living room, to the side of our small conversational group, my father relaxed in Clarence's favorite brown leather recliner with his eyes closed. Therefore, we talked softly as our spontaneous conversation vibrated in and out and to past and present existence, becoming a mental exercise in time travel. We were sharing memories of the good time spent together with Clarence, who was built like Jack Johnson, the fighter, except that he was better looking. Must have had some Mandingo blood in him, looks like he could have. Clarence was a tall, handsome Black man with broad shoulders. As he grew older, Clarence's head full of black hair had become a beautiful salt and pepper with no intention of ever balding. His subtle sense of humor, so I was never sure when he was telling me the truth or just pulling my leg without smiling. In fact, I said, I don't even remember seeing him smile with his face. He smiled with his eyes. And Clarence would always talk his way out of a fight. He was a good negotiator. Good thing too, because if he ever hit somebody, they'd be hurt real bad. I remember when I first saw Clarence, I thought he was the biggest man I'd ever seen. Of course, now I was only about 12 years old. He was the only one I knew who could have gone through what he did on that job. It was always hard to be the first anywhere. Clarence's shoulders were never slumped, even when he was tired. He always stood tall and erect, like Frederick Douglass without a beard. We always thought of him like Jackie Robinson of Leakesville Energy Company. Listen to you all comparing him with all those great men. He's just being Clarence. Wasn't trying to be nobody else, Dolores contributed. Well, that may be so, but he sure enough made those white folks respect him, though. Didn't even want him to retire when he did. Yes, sirree. Whole bunch of them came to the funeral, even cried. They ended up treating Clarence like he was the president of the company. You wouldn't believe that he started out shoveling coal in the yard. There was laughter or respect as we visualized, all of us visualized the truth. We all love Clarence, and he was going to be missed. His smiling eyes gave us all a warm and fuzzy feeling. He started to work at the power company during a time when Uncle Sam of the United States of America allowed his son, Mr. Jim Crow, to rule the South of the Mason-Dixon line. Mr. Jim Crow forced Black men, women, and children to lie in prostrate positions in southern states while he trampled and stomped with lynching feet up and down their spines. It was a stressful time in the South, and freedom laws on the books were mostly ignored in the fields. For example, it was about 10 years after the Brown versus the Board of Education school desegregation ruling before the schools in Eden, Leakesville, North Carolina actually began to show signs of desegregation. My youngest cousin, Faye, graduated in the last segregated class. Nevertheless, Clarence was such a reliable worker that the laws changed. As the laws changed, he could not be denied job promotions as he earned them. He was able to work his way up to become the control room operator. It was his responsibility to make sure the entire plant ran smoothly. The living room became quiet as we all continued our personal reflections about Clarence in the silence of our own minds. After a while, someone mentioned the trunk. Dolores, you still got Aunt Donsy's old trunk. Good, you're using it as a coffee table. That's good.
So when do we tell what's in the trunk, or do we not tell?
That's what I was gonna ask you. And how old? Wait, before you do that, the book is about how old? Aunt Donsy's trunk. That story is about, it's been out, what, 5 years or?
I gotta look here and see. Yeah, it's 2014.
Okay.
Yeah,
So a lot of folks,
2014.
probably read it by then. You could tell us what's in the trunk. What was in the
Well,
trunk?
Actually,
Well,
I won't go through the details of what was in the trunk, but I'll give you a gist of it. Because you can find that out. I think she kept our lives, stories of our lives in segments. There were things in that trunk that you could look through, and you saw the family's growth and development.
Mm-hmm.
She had information that I had no idea she had about my school. She kept things things I had made. She was a terrific crocheter. She made money. Aunt Donsy couldn't work on a job, and there were no jobs available for Black women except to do housekeeping,
Mm-hmm.
laundry, or nannies at that time. So she couldn't work. She was crippled. She crocheted. She planted flowers and made flower pots to sell to people or give to sometimes. And she crocheted all sorts of things that she was able to make a penny, and she could stretch a penny. So things that she would crochet, quilts, sheets and pillowcases and things like that. And like Loretta said, her money,
She
that was
baked
her
cakes too. She used to bake cakes and sell
oh,
them.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that was before mixers were out. She would bake the cakes
Yes.
with her hand.
Mhm.
I used to sit
They
at
didn't
the
have
table and
mixers.
watch her. Yeah.
Oh,
She was
yes.
strong.
And
Mhm.
didn't she, I can remember her attaching something to the table where she would,
Coconut.
yes,
cake.
for the coconut
Yeah,
case,
the
where she would
coconut,
crush up
it
the
was
coconut.
a grinder, the old
Yes.
fashioned type grinder.
Yes. Yes,
Mhm.
and that big thing on the wall that what is she making that? Bread or something?
Yeah, the
That
big
Oh,
wooden
you know,
tray, that big wooden, was it wooden?
it was really big.
Yeah.
Yeah, to put
Now
biscuits and to make biscuits.
that is very old. That's old because she put
Yes.
the dough in it. That was
Yes.
really, really old.
Yes. Oh, I can remember that. Oh,
I think that belonged to grandmother. That
Yeah,
I do
yeah.
too. I do
And we
too.
lost
Have
all of it.
such
All of
a
it was gone.
Wow.
You
Oh,
guys
what's
have
going on?
such a rich, I'm sorry, Elaine, a rich history that they can read in the book and talk about. It sounds like that Aunt Donsy, of course, she'll live forever in your hearts, but her legacy and things that you guys talk about, and even right now talking to all of you guys, Lotus and Deborah and Donna, you guys had a variation of memories and different things like that. And it also sounds like you guys, this is like your reunion right here on here, because you said
Yes.
you hadn't,
Yes.
Lotus, you hadn't seen Elaine in about how many years was
Oh
it?
man, the last time I saw Elaine, she was a teenager.
Oh my,
Oh, my
oh
goodness.
my.
I
Yeah.
said 40 years or so.
It
It
was
was more
the
than
last
that.
time I saw the twins, they were in elementary
I got a
school.
birthday coming up. I got a birthday coming up. The 31st of this month, I'll be 83.
Yay, that's my daughter's birthday. She'll be
Wow.
30,
Is it?
36. My daughter will be
31st?
36
All right.
on the
She's good people.
31st.
She's good people.
Yes, there's some things on the board I want you guys to hear. It sounds like you got some cousins and stuff on here. Let me tell you what they're saying. Okay, so you have, I'll just give you some names. B.L. Walden is watching.
Okay.
And you have Vicky Wiley. I think that's Eleanor M. Baker Rogers is watching. And then Vicky Wiley, she said, what chapter are you reading? But you've already long gone read it. And that was chapter 4.
Well, that was the first chapter.
That was the first chapter that she read.
Mhm.
And then you have Ann Dalton Younger said, hello, cousin.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And Jerry Morton was talking about, that was 50 cents, you know, somewhere in our talking that we was talking about, and how dirt cheap it was. And then is it Eleanor? Eleanor, A-L-L-E, is the name Eleanor? A-L-L-E-N-E-R, is that Eleanor?
I guess.
Okay, and so they were talking about the organ, and also Ann Dalton says, thanks, blessing 83.
Okay. Oh, yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Getting up there.
But before you guys go, we had a wonderful discussion. I really enjoyed this. Like I said, I enjoy listening to the stories. And also when I look on YouTube, I see like just the pictures going by and talking about you guys' history. And you told me, Elaine, you said about the silent. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And then again, I'm going to ask you, like my mom, they were on the farm. They weren't slaves, but they were sharecroppers. Did you guys, the silent, what about your family? Were you guys?
People born between the 1920s and the 1940s, were born during that time, are actually called the silent generation.
Mhm.
And I actually have a documentary on YouTube about that. That's what it's called, the silent generation. They discovered, a newspaper man, a reporter, somebody gave that age group that name, and it stuck. And it's really because even though you wouldn't have realized it, they were the smallest amount of births during that time. So you didn't have a lot of people being born, and they didn't do a whole lot of talking about anything. They just kept it to themselves and did what they had to do and kept it moving. And I think that in the documentary, you find out a lot of information. I actually talked to other people in my age category, and they do memories about the silent generation. Okay, our stories are truth, regard. Our stories are truth, because there are other things out there about the silent generation. And it's really a fact that like when I said we do ear hustling, I was ear hustling for days, because we got an adult conversation, not children's conversation.
Mhm.
Children are not to hear or not to be involved. It's adult conversation. So we had to sort of ear hustle, okay? So what else was that you asked me?
And that's on the YouTube says, I can just type in the silent generation and it'll come up.
Our stories, our truth. Put the whole thing in.
Okay, the silent
And-
generation, our stories.
Our stories,
are
our
true.
truth.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Mhm.
post that on there after this video. Could you guys tell us individually what you want the folks that are listening to walk away from hearing your story today? And either one of you can start with Lotus, then we'll just go around like that.
You're gonna start with me. Well, I would like people to, what I would like people to get from this story is a story of a family and survival. A story of a family and love. The love of family, the love of God, and how they persevered through some rough times. And even though there was tragedy, there were deaths, there was mistreatment along the way, especially toward the end, where a beloved uncle in the family turned on everybody. The family is still resilient. We've got the history to prove it. And even though Elaine and we're cousins because of a white man, it makes no difference. She's still my family. She's still cousin to me. And I'm cousin to her. We love each other. I love Deborah and Donna. They're my family.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter how we came to be family.
Right.
We're family and we
We're
love
family.
each other. So I want people to get the book, read the book. I think they will be as intrigued as I was reading the book, because there's some things in the book that I wasn't aware of. When Aunt Donsy died, my mother didn't tell me about her death until she was buried. So I was not able to even come to the funeral. But I think earlier I said that the last time I saw the twins, they were in elementary school. That's not true. The last time I saw the twins was at, somebody died. Who was it?
Your father's funeral. I remember seeing you.
No, but it was my father's funeral, but somebody in the family died. Was it Dolores? I think Dolores. I came to Dolores, because my mother and I came to your house.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So so that was the last time I saw you, when your mother died.
Okay.
It's in our late 30s.
Oh, right. And what I would like for people to take away from this video is to know that somebody else and somebody else's family has suffered and persevered, like you said,
Yes.
with Aunt Donsy, with that crutch. I will never forget the crutch, and hearing the crutch as she walked along the floor, and her faith in God, and knowing what your father went through to get that Congressional Medal of Honor. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And what my father went through down at Duke Power, they had showers because my father started at Duke Power working in the coal yard. And so they were supposed to take showers before they come home. And a lot of days my father would come home, he was dark complexioned enough, but he'd come home, he'd be black, his eyebrow, and we would laugh, we would think it's funny because he would be so black, covered in coal. And we wondered, why is he not taking a shower? But I'm sure it was because sometimes he may have feared for his life, or because they weren't nice, and so he wanted to avoid a fight or whatever. So he just came home and took a shower, but he never gave up.
Right.
So never give up. And if your family, whoever's watching this, if your family's history isn't as rich as ours, make it rich. Find something to excel at, to make your own history.
I like for people to take from this video is that we all can persevere, as they said, and that just love one another and just grow closer together, and then build upon that.
Right.
Because everybody has a history. It may not always be good,
Right.
but you have
that.
history.
Right.
And also write it down.
Write it down.
Because the children that come after you, there might might want to learn about the people that came before them, the ancestors. And like Elaine said, you know, the silent generation, we didn't know a lot of these things. So I'm glad that she was ear hustling.
Me too. I was glad.
And we appreciate it. And because we learned so much,
Right.
you know, just by talking about this ourselves.
Very interesting.
It's very
Very,
interesting.
very
And thank
interesting.
you.
And thank you. And it's wonderful to see you, Lord. It's as beautiful as ever. Just brings back memories of hopping over that ditch in Aunt Donsa's backyard.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Elaine?
Well, I would like to emphasize the fact that what you said, I wrote it down. I started, my children and grandchildren started asking me questions. And I found, well, I got 4 daughters. I had to tell 4 times. So wait a minute, I'll just write all this down and you can read it with your leisure. So that's what started me to write about this book. And Donna and Deborah took so long getting back to me because I checked everything out to make sure I was factual. They took so long getting back to me to verify that what I was saying was true. I went on and wrote Price Road in between writing this book. Okay.
And
Price Road.
and how many times
is
did you come to North Carolina? And you came to North Carolina right many times too.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
you did.
You came to North Carolina to check everything out.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And I even, at that Mark Museum, I even went there to the historian they had there who knew some of our people and was able to verify some things. I mean, I checked it out. But the fact is that people, the older people, should actually leave, like you said, something for their children to understand. Write it down. And I have friends who will say, oh, I could have written a book. Well, why don't you? Just, it don't have to be published. You can write it down for your children. Collect pictures. I spent all of in the pandemic, I spent last summer putting pictures in order. I got some family photo albums that have space to write the names, dates, and anything else you want about the picture. So I organized the pictures and I have about 5 albums put together. So yeah, and everybody says, well, you have it on the phone, it's digital, you can get, but everybody can't see it on my phone.
Right.
This way I can hand a book and they can look through the book at and enjoy and know what they're looking at. So I'm advising anybody, please write it down. Write it down.
Is there going to be a sequel to Aunt Donsy's Trunk, or this is done?
This is it. This is it. We had things that we could add to it, but I'll leave it for somebody else to do that. Okay. We added the information we got about Clarence, the stuff we know that we found out about the church and the cemetery. But it's just, it's there. This is the foundation.
Yeah.
I'm finished with the book. And my purpose now in life is to spread the history. I'm really using my Facebook and social media to give you all history, Black history every day.
Yeah, I see that.
Yes.
A lot of rich stuff that you be giving out. I see that. That is really good. And this has been great, you guys. I'm so glad you came together. And even though, like you said, it's been some time and different things like that. And your story, like you say, Elaine, everybody, whatever you could do, whether you write it down, it's your story. And we look forward to whatever else you're going to be doing. What's next? What are you thinking of next? I know you do things on the Facebook, but what's next for you?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm going to be doing a published book or anything, but I'm constantly writing. So it's here for the family when they, but I'm not actually publishing. I think this will be it for that purpose. I got other things to do. The time is short now. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at that. So I'm doing things that I enjoy. Like Lord has said, I'm enjoying this retirement. So I'm not forcing anything, just it is helping people find their way.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Deborah and Donna, for being here. Lourdes, thank you for being here as well, for sharing your guys' story. We're going to, this is it for tonight, unless you have anything else to say before you go. It's certainly been a pleasure, and do tell the folks on Facebook how you enjoy your time, spending your time here with ESP Presents and ESP
Yes.
Book Chats. Do let us know how you.
And
Thank you for
will be-
having us.
You're welcome.
This will be taped so we can forward it to people who couldn't get
Yes.
in tonight.
Yes, this is recorded. You'll get a copy. And also I'll give you a link if you want to upload it to your own YouTube. For
Thank
yourself.
you.
are
Thank
so
you for
welcome.
having us. And thank you. You
Yes.
generated our family reunion. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Love
so
you,
much.
family.
All right.
Love you. Love you. Take care, everybody.
All right. Good night. Thank you so
Good
much.
night.
Mhm.
And
Bye.
you can just drop down. If anybody know how to drop down, I'm gonna tell other folks what is going on, what we have coming up. And if you want to stay and listen, you can. If not, so this is what we have coming up in February. On February 8th, we have we're gonna have coming to the stage, as we say. It is going to be Mary Ellen Sinovich. We're going to talk about her book, and it is Truth Lives. In this story, you will see, I don't know if you guys can see it, try to get it really good for you. You will see her book is Truth Lives. To me, it's more like a devotion or a or Proverbs. It's 120, and it's reflective of yourself. What do you say to people? What do you, how do you handle yourself in talking to one another? So this will be good. And it's on the 28th, as I said. I'm sorry, it's on February 8th, not the 28th, but it's February 8th. Let's see if you guys get a good look at that. Probably a lot of lighting there. Hopefully you can see it. Let me hold it up some. And it is Truth Lives. Hopefully you can see that well. And that is going to be Mary Ellen Sinovich. So guys, you stay tuned for that. Keep it locked, and she'll be coming here and talk with us. You'll see that again. That will be February 8th. And on February 28th, our book club, we're going to discuss our book. This is a book about why are all the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria. So this book here is going to be a couple of our people on the panel, and it talks about other conversations about race, and it's by Beverly Tatum. If you can see that, Beverly Daniel Tatum. And this is the 20th anniversary. This edition is the 20th anniversary. So thank you guys for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you to Elaine and her family. It was great listening to their family history, and you guys have been great. Kept you up here, and good night to you all. Thank you so much. Thank you for every share. And also on Tuesdays, be on the lookout for our Scout Out Shout Out. And that's when we have, this is on Instagram only. And we have 5 authors to 2 minutes or less to talk about their book. Let us know where you're from, the name of your book, and the backdrop of your book. So that comes every Tuesday on Instagram at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time only. Be on the lookout for that is coming up February 1st. So thank you guys. Thank you so much. Do swipe and share. Again, our guest tonight was Elaine T. Jones, and she talked about her book, Aunt Donsy's Story, and it's a story about their history. So keep it locked. Thank you guys. Signing off. Signing off.